today, looking from 1607 to 1754. Now, when they use these dates, what comes to mind when you hear 1607? What colony? Plymouth was 1620. Nice try. 1607, 13 years before that, was in Virginia, known as Jamestown, Virginia. Very good. That was kind of the first settlement, if you will. So with national identity, since America speaks English, right, we're going to focus on the English settlers, considered British, not American, right? So we don't have this term American really until the First Great Awakening. So people kind of see themselves as British subjects. That's why the American Revolution was so revolutionary. And identity is largely based on colony, right? There's also class. So ID based on the colony you're from, the colony, and class. So there's not a lot of egalitarianism. Does anybody remember what egalitarian means? If it starts with E, it's going to be egalitarian, means equality. So this idea of American is all about equality, egalitarianism. During the colonial period, it's very class-driven, colony-driven. It's very fragmented. That's why that watershed moment of 1776 is so important, because everybody's on the same page. When it comes to politics, it's mainly local power, because we have a king in England and everything, but it's mainly these local power. So development of local power, generally democratic in the north, especially in north, we have town hall meetings, especially in places like Virginia will have some representation, if you will. In Massachusetts, we'll have the New England town meetings and everything. We have town meetings for early democracy, if you will. Okay, at the local level, we have these town meetings where you get to vote. In the South, we have kind of this aristocracy of landowners. Okay, we have this aristocracy of landowners where it's pretty much if you own land, then you have power, whereas the little person doesn't really have that power, right? Then when it comes to work exchange technology, we have a lot of trade in New England, right? A lot of trade, fishing, farming, timber, furs, right? Also timber, fishing, furs, and some farming. And in the South, it's mainly cash crops. In South, cash crops. And what are the two famous cash crops in the South? Cotton and tobacco. Very good. Okay. And of course, we have slavery in the South. Also, early on, we had this, servitude for 7 years, and then they were free. It was called what? Indentured servants. Okay. We had indentured servants. That was early on, right? Early on in American history, in the early 1600s, we had these indentured servants. But in 1619, when the first blacks as slaves started coming to America, that's where they started to replace these indentured servants with slavery, because indentured servants If they're free after 7 years, is that a steady supply of labor? Cheap labor? No, it's not. So then using slaves was, African slaves was the alternative. When it comes to culture in New England, what religion is really basing the culture? Anybody remember the religion of New England? Puritan, very good. Puritan religion is life, right? It really kind of, in New England, the Puritan religion really kind of shapes your life. And then also in South, we have the racist kind of caste system, if you will. And then also throughout America, we have the first Great Awakening. And we've talked about before how important that first Great Awakening was socially during this time period because it paved the way for this egalitarianism. Before the Great Awakening, it was all about your aristocracy, your education, but the Great Awakening proved that anybody could talk to God, that anybody could study the Bible, that anybody is responsible before God, that you can't just expect somebody else to go to college and to learn the Bible and then to rely on them, but you are personally accountable. And so that personal accountability is really important when it comes to the American Revolution and the First Great Awakening. Then we have migration. I would say that the climates and soil really differ. Is the difference led to family farming in the north? So we have family farms, especially in the north, and then in the south we have plantations. Now, it's this misunderstanding that all of the South was just a bunch of plantations. Actually, most slaves did not live on a huge plantation. Most slaves were one or two that lived on a family farm, if you will. Still in slavery, still having zero rights, but not this slaveocracy that we always think about. That develops a little bit later on, but not to the same degree that we always think. And when it comes to migration, we also have, people coming to America for new opportunities. So I'd say new opportunities, especially to places like Virginia, places like New England. We have these new opportunities that people are seeking. In Virginia, it's all about money, okay? Remember that. It's all about economic freedom, entrepreneurship. In New England, it's all about escaping religious persecution, right? And then you also have 700,000 plus enslaved people coming to America, right? So that you have that big migration there. When it comes to the specifics, you don't need to get super specific, but in 1607 was when Virginia was established. 1620 was when Plymouth Rock, New England, Massachusetts was established. And then 10 years after that, 1620, we would have the first Great Migration, right? Whenever we say Great Migration, we're usually talking about World War I, blacks moving from the South to the North for industrial jobs. But in this situation, this is kind of the first Great Migration where you have a lot of Puritans moving from England over to Massachusetts. When it comes to geography, we have illness in marshy South, okay, the marshy Southlands and everything. As we talked about, these plantations and family farms, really, are solidifying the geography down there. When it comes to America and the world, we're competing competition with Native Americans. Competition with Native Americans. Let's see if I can spell. Okay, so we have that competition with Native Americans there. I would maybe put this a little bit down here. It's okay. So we have that competition with Native Americans that's happening. We also have this scramble between European powers to get territory. So England competes with other Europeans for land, okay? And that reminds us of the French and Indian War and that conflict and everything. So you have these European powers conflicting with one another. As we mentioned in our last review session, you will not have a DBQ on this period, okay? Era 1, Era 2, Era 9, there's no DBQ on, okay? But when it comes to LEQ, you have an option. You'll have 3 options, and one of the options will probably be on Era 2 or 3. It won't be on Era 1. And the other LEQs will be on one of the other time periods as well. Usually they have a similar theme, like maybe it's national identity, maybe it's politics, maybe it's work exchange technology, maybe it's culture, maybe it's migration, maybe it's geography, maybe it's America and the world. So make sure that you feel pretty confident on one of those themes in one of those eras, because they're going to throw a theme at you. Usually they do easy themes like work exchange technology or politics or culture, but it could be something like migration. And if you're not comfortable with that idea of migration, you kind of need to be. Then looking at period 1 there, era 1, if we're looking at America and national identity, there's really no cohesion for Native American groups, right? There's really no cohesion. And Europeans initially did not intend to stay. Okay, so before 1607, so we're channeling back to Era 1 before Era 2. From 1492, Columbus's watershed moment, right? That's when the worlds collided, to 1607, just before England's first permanent colony. Most Europeans didn't intend to stay. Also, we have the Spanish domination in much of the Americas. The French and the Dutch, what did they share in common? The French and the Dutch. When you think of French and Dutch people, do you think of like super violent people? Okay, very good. French and Dutch traded with the natives, okay, with the native inhabitants of America. And so that trade was really big. The Dutch, a lot of times we say, think of the Dutch and the French as kind of more trade, harmonious. That doesn't necessarily mean that they didn't have an army or anything like that. The Dutch were very much into their banking system and everything, and so they definitely would protect that. You also have these treaties and conflicts with Native Americans. So you have these treaties and conflicts with Native Americans that develops. What was that? Oh, the projector seemed to